Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Rachel Patton, Executive Director of Preserve Arkansas. Preserve Arkansas is the statewide nonprofit advocate for historic preservation. Welcome to Women in Preservation, the series that features women who are working to save historic places. I want to begin by thanking our series sponsor, DMX Architecture of Fayetteville, for their generous support of Women in Preservation. Many of you are already members of Preserve Arkansas, and we thank you for your support. If you're not already a member, I'd like to invite you to formally join us for as little as $50 a year. Your membership provides vital support to Preserve Arkansas and allows us to continue our work of saving the state's historic places. You can learn more and become a member at preservearkansas.org. You're all invited to join us this Thursday, November the 16th, for Preserve Arkansas's annual membership meeting. It will be held at the Art Space on Main in downtown Pine Bluff. This meeting is free for Preserve Arkansas members, and you may learn more and RSVP on our website at preservearkansas.org. You're also invited to join us for a fun event the week after Thanksgiving. We'll have Preserve Arkansas Bingo Night at Flyway Brewing in the Argenta Historic District of downtown North Little Rock at 7 o'clock in the evening. It is free to attend, and then you pay $1 for each of your bingo cards, and the proceeds from your bingo cards are donated to Preserve Arkansas. The Arkansas Preservation Awards are coming up quickly. Tickets and sponsorships are now available for the Preservation Awards, which is set for January the 26th, 2024 at Robinson Center in Little Rock. Join us to honor the first historic preservation organization in the state, Historic Washington Foundation, with the Parker Westbrook Award for Lifetime Achievement, as well as 10 outstanding projects and people across the state. Learn more and purchase tickets at preservearkansas.org. Now it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Jill Judy. Jill Judy became a preservationist in an unexpectedly roundabout way. It started by spending a summer working for an archaeologist in Central America, then going to college in her native state of Oregon, working in the Foreign Commercial Service, getting an MA in Economics and Spanish from Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies, becoming a New York banker, and later a restaurateur in Florida. All of this helped her and her husband, Mark Brown, to establish Downtown Dwellings, a historic restoration and property management company in the heart of historic Little Rock. Jill's varied experiences are similar to many of our own, and those experiences do an excellent job of demonstrating that individuals with very different pasts and skill sets can contribute greatly to preservation and neighborhood revitalization. In this Women in Preservation segment, Jill will touch on serendipitous events that led her and her husband to find and then be a part of the revitalization of historic districts in downtown Little Rock. She will go over challenges and some of the many errors made before getting into the preservation groove to restore 57 properties, many out of foreclosure or auction, all within 1.5 miles of their personal home. It is her hope to encourage others to do the same in their own historic neighborhoods. Welcome, Jill.
Thank you, Rachel. Let's see.
You're welcome. You look good.
Well, thank you. I'm going to continue. Let's see if this works.
Okay.
Okay. It's working. Yay. Thank you, Rachel. I'm honored to be here today to talk about my preservation efforts with my husband in downtown Little Rock. I should preface this with this is the first time I've had to do a paper since grad school, so please bear with me. But we came to Little Rock about 20 years ago, and we've thought we were going to retire, and the market crashed, which told us we weren't going to retire. My goal today is to have fun reflecting on my life stories that reflects on preservation efforts, and hope to encourage you to think of your past experiences a little differently, and perhaps jump into the world of preservation a little more deeply than you are right now. As Rachel said, I will mention how we got to Little Rock and some of the challenges that we had and some of our mistakes. And she promised that people love pictures of before and after pictures, etc. So I'm going to have a lot of before and after pictures. It's important right now to clarify that I have been lucky enough in life to have found a great partner that likes doing this too. His name is Mark Brown, and we have restored properties side by side for years, and we have been a formidable duo. Mark is still alive and well, but a few years ago asked if he could really retire, because this can get kind of, it's a lot, and he deserved it. So we have grown the company, and it's time for him to be able to really retire. I think it'll be really clear at the end of the presentation that we've succeeded with what we do with a lot of luck and determination and teamwork, but we started out as laymen, and we had no special engineering, construction, or architectural skills. Mark is fabulous with systems and making things work, and my focus has been dealing on the banking, financing, tax credits, management of the Spanish-speaking construction teams, and then growing our company. This is a great screen because it shows one of our biggest projects. We were halfway done, and then our neighbor had a fire, and we had to start over again. And that's the same house on the inside. So in this Women in Preservation segment, as I mentioned, I'm going to focus on a few different things. Property identification and evaluation. Can we save this structure without going bankrupt? Financing. When we started this out, we had no idea what sort of financing was out there for people who wanted to do preservation. And then I'm going to spend just a tiny bit on state and federal tax credits because they've been really important to us. But I know that there's been other people that have done a great job with this as a topic, so I won't mention much about it. And then because so many people are scared of being in a regulated district, I thought I'd give some examples of the good and the bad of what we've done. But the bottom line is, if you're preserving a structure and you want it to be beautiful and historic, so does everybody else. So you really don't have to worry too much. And then I'm going to touch on a little bit on the restoration of the interiors to make sure that you create an interior space that will last for years to come, but it will also be desirable for a future renter or buyer. Okay, but first we're going to talk about me. I was born in this small town in Oregon right after my parents built their own mid-century modern dream house. While it was a beautiful house to grow up in, it was in the country, and I felt isolated and found myself drawn to our little town of 12,000's oldest neighborhoods, where there were beautiful Victorians and craftsmen. And I couldn't understand why anyone would want to live out here when they could live in the city. I've lived in the cities ever since leaving Oregon. My early years were a challenge. I was an adorable child, but my mother had a difficult birth, and I consequently was born with a mild birth defect, something akin to having a stroke. I had brain damage with limited control of my left side, and learning was difficult. I had to work hard, and my brain eventually did catch up, but by high school, I was doing well academically, second in my class. Many, like 300 students. I mentioned this because at the end of my high school career, I took a aptitude test, and I was really disappointed when my school guidance counselor told me that I really had all the skills to be a very happy bricklayer. Having some challenges with movement and thinking I was the best thing ever since I'm college bound, I knew it was a joke. But now looking back at it decades later, I laugh because I can tile, I can sheetrock, I can replace foundation, joist, and more. And so, no joke, I am now a glorified bricklayer. Before going to college, as I mentioned, or Rachel mentioned in the intro, I spent a summer in Guatemala, and I had the opportunity to go off to a lot of archaeological sites. I had studied Mayan culture since the 4th grade and wanted to explore that option as a turning a passion into a career. Instead, I found I do not have an archaeologist's patience, but Guatemala was a country at civil war, and I learned a lot there. I can't believe my parents let me go there. I saw dead people on the street. The poverty and violence was incredible, and it made a lasting impression. And I returned to go to college at the University of Oregon, determined to make a difference, and started studying social change, economics, and development. The experience forever changed how I saw justice in the world, and I graduated with degrees in Spanish, economics, and international relations. I worked after school. Actually, I got an internship, which turned into a real job at the Foreign Commercial Service. And that took me to Peru and Machu Picchu, and again kindled my interest in international business. I left the Foreign Commercial Service to get a master's degree at Johns Hopkins, specializing in economics. I loved economics. It opened up a new way to see the world and gave me a glimpse into the fact that everything is interrelated. Seeing the world through the lens of economic cause and effect has helped me in numerous times of life, and preservation is no exception. I believe that as preservationists, if we want to steward a building into the next millennium, we must keep it relevant in the current world and plan for the building's future. And this belief has really been molded by my economic background. This is an aside, but this picture was taken at Clinton's inauguration. I was in the crowd and very excited to be a part of this history. I followed and studied Clinton's policies and was really impressed that he was doing everything that top economists said you needed to do to make a country strong. I mentioned this because the love of Bill Clinton and those programs that he initiated made me very excited to eventually move to Arkansas. And then upon graduation from grad school, I took a job with a New York bank called Chase Manhattan, which is important for a later story. To my surprise, though, rather than helping to solve the Latin American debt crisis, which I had naively hoped to do, I somehow ended up in marketing and strategic planning in private banking in Miami. And for those of you that don't know, private banking is banking for the ultra wealthy. This was not what I thought my banking life would be, but it did teach me a valuable lesson and skills that I will always be grateful for. I got good at strategic planning and seeing the big picture. I stuck this job out for a few years, but didn't have the desire nor what it took to make it in the corporate banking world. So instead, I broke my mother's heart, quit the bank, and turned a t-shirt shop into a small restaurant coffee shop on the beach of Fort Lauderdale. And this coffee shop was my first renovation. So not only did I learn to restore this little coffee shop there, but not knowing what I was doing, I hired an architect who recommended the use of an interior designer. And this was to rehab a 650 square foot space that I was renting and would never own. After spending literally thousands of dollars on these designs, before even submitting the plans, Fort Lauderdale's plan review department told me I needed engineering drawings instead. So very over budget already. I spent what I had left on an engineer and shady contractor who had a low bid and told me what I wanted to hear. The contractor had to be fired for non-performance. And firing a contractor in Fort Lauderdale is a big deal because it's not like Arkansas. You can't work as your own contractor. So I should have had to stop the whole deal and start the process over again, which would have killed my pocketbook and killed my dream. So I'm very thankful that the planning department of Fort Lauderdale allowed me to play contractor and finish this. And I did learn a very valuable lesson in that it was the city building inspectors that were actually on my side. They were the ones that told me that work was not being done to plan and it would not work. And they let me be a contractor so long as I kept the original subs and finished the build out. And I am very thankful for that group of people. But as an aside, for all of us that like to criticize our Little Rock planning department, they are an absolute joy to work with compared to some larger cities. So back to St. Bart's, I owned the shop for nearly 12 years and dealt with numerous plumbing, electrical, and HVAC issues, which was great preparation for being a landlord. Great things came out of this life experience, and the best thing by far was meeting my very favorite customer. This is Mark. He had spent much of his life overseas in the boating world, and he had restored his own personal vessels and surveyed boats for others. While I love the coffee shop chapter of my life, my shop was open 12 hours a day, all days but Christmas, and I knew the business could not support me in retirement. Mark was in the same sort of situation, so we both took out home equity loans on our separate houses and bought a couple of rental properties in an effort to bolster a non-existent retirement plan. The properties we bought were old and tired, but not unsafe and vacant, and it was a good place for the two of us to start what we were trying to do. So the way we got to Arkansas was that Mark's niece was stationed here with her husband at the Air Force Base. And we stayed at one of the local B&Bs in the historic district of the Governor's Mansion district in downtown Little Rock. And we just fell in love with the homes and the people and the pace of the district. After multiple return trips, usually planned around two big home tours, one done by the QQA in the spring and the other by the Quapaw Methodist Church around Christmas, we put in an offer on a fourplex at 23rd and State. I'll touch on this a little bit later when I talk about financing, but the day before closing, our large national bank withdrew their loan commitment because even though it appraised for enough value, the lender said it looked like a crack house. This is called redlining and it's illegal, but we were under the gun and were afraid to lose our deposit. So we scrambled to ask relatives to lend us the money until we could get new financing. So because of that, I will always recommend that you try to find a good local banker. Okay, so we are in Little Rock, and this project needed a lot more effort than we thought. And so we were spending every other weekend driving the 1,200 miles up to Little Rock to finish the Cheek House. We loved Little Rock and we saw our neighborhood as the land of opportunity, and we could not understand the negative reputation downtown suffered. And to this point, if any of you out there are looking at a new neighborhood, I think it sometimes helps to be an outsider. I think we saw our new neighborhood with the eyes of South Floridians. The housing stock was gorgeous and it was crazy affordable. And we couldn't understand why everyone wasn't scrambling to take advantage of these restoration diamonds. We were accused by others of overpaying and no doubt earned our nickname of the Florida Yahoos because of our seemingly blind optimism. Sometimes being an outsider can give better perspective. So if you want your own project, do your own due diligence, of course, but take what local realtors and old timers say with a grain of salt. They most likely don't have your vision or perspective on what you think that house's future can be. Okay, so in 2006, we decided to move to Little Rock full time. The building my coffee shop was in was being sold for demolition, and it was time for Mark to retire. We did the numbers, and I thought if we sold what we had in Fort Lauderdale, we could afford to buy a few fourplexes in Little Rock and actually retire full time. I sold the shop and moved first, starting our first serious renovation at 1410 Arch Street, next to the home that we purchased to live in at 605 Daisy Bates. We had our income properties at this point and really thought we could retire, and even bought a camper. But then the housing crash of 2006 hit, and our savings took the hit also. Reading the newspaper in bed became a thing of the past, and we started restoring properties in earnest to buffer our income. Okay. So how to restore a property that makes financial sense. So this slide kind of goes through the basics of what I look at when we're buying a property. Do you like the property or need to improve the neighborhood? Many of the things that we've bought have been to protect something that's right next door. And I call that saving the mothership. And can you get to the property easily? Travel time is money. And our Fort Lauderdale experience of coming up and down. And also when we were in Fort Lauderdale, we bought homes that were 3 or 4 miles away from where we lived. And with awful traffic, it just meant that it might take an hour or two in travel time to get to your property sometimes. And then I'm going to go over a worksheet for cost benefit analysis, but doing a simple cost benefit analysis will really help you see if you can make that project financially work. And then I'm going to go over a little bit about how to get a commercial loan and really what they are. And then how to know if your property qualifies for tax credits, and how it impacts the loss cost benefit analysis. And then my advice is to start on a project that's right for your pocketbook. We started on very small projects that if they didn't work, we could probably still pay the mortgage before we sold the project. Okay, let's see. So here is a really basic way of looking at how we look at the numbers for buying a property. It seems pretty simple, and it really is, but this is what a commercial banker is going to want to see. In this example, as it says, it's based on a return on investment, no construction. So let's say you've got a neighbor that's got a fourplex next door to you, and they've just remodeled the place, and they've got a job in Dallas, and they're moving and they're selling the place. And you think it's a good investment, but you're not quite sure. But more than anything, you want to make sure that the lawn stays mowed and that there's good neighbors next door. So you basically take the rental income, subtract all the expenses. But one thing that a lot of people don't look at, and it's down here in, I don't know if you can see this, but benefits year 1, depreciation and taxable lost profit. Depreciation is about 5% of purchase price. And what that basically means is that in the first few years of owning that property, even if it's crazy successful, anything that you make will be tax-free. And so I think it's very important to look at the ramifications of that when you're looking at a project. Okay, so this is an example of a pretend it's a fourplex that you pay $400,000 for, and you want to know if it makes sense. So forgive me, because it's this has been my first attempt to get Excel into a PowerPoint presentation, but hopefully it's pretty readable. And again, it's all about the income at the top, subtracting the expenses, and then getting the totals going. So here's a summary of if you were to do a project best case with a 7.5% interest, I think I had in the prior thing. So you can see that it can be a profitable thing to do. So and what Mark and I have learned over the years is it's crazy profitable to be someone who doesn't care about if keeping up your project. But it's profitable enough if you do take good care of your properties and put money into them. And then this is an example of the worksheet that I put myself through when it's going to be a construction loan. And again, it's exactly like the last one, except it adds in a line for what is the property going to be worth when you're done. And you can go and talk to realtors or do your research online to find out how much rentals will bring in, and then you just fill out all the other numbers. Somewhere here, I have an example of, I hope, of different apps on your phone that you can use that will help you. They're mortgage calculators, also called amortization apps, and they will help you fill in a lot of these numbers. And I'll go over that in a little bit. But here's another example of a property that needs work, and you're going to put 100% into it. The assumptions are that you buy it for $200,000, you put $200,000 into it, you get a 20-year fixed mortgage at 7.5% and a down payment of 20%. And at the end of the day, you can see if you can get tax credits that are cashed out, it's going to be, this is all on paper. It never works out this well, but this is how you can move a project forward and make a good living by restoring properties. So I want to tell you about some caveats because those numbers looked pretty amazing. This 327% return on your initial investment of $40,000 is wonderful, but remember, you're not being paid for your time. So if you actually put your time at a decent rate in there, you'd be making a lot less. And with all great returns, there is great risk. So be extremely conservative in your numbers. And historic preservation projects are hard and time consuming and really don't make a lot of sense oftentimes without tax credits. I have never once been close to being in budget. I think the best I've ever done is 20% over. And with COVID, we've been 50% over. So this is on paper, it looks good, but be very, very conservative. Okay. So, and if you do this, get a great accountant that specializes in real estate, because the benefits of real estate are really misunderstood by a lot of basic accountants, and it's changed our world to have a good accountant. So I'm going to talk a little bit about loans that you may already know about, but it'd be excellent for the first example, being a good steward of a historic property and getting a loan, but not doing construction work on it. And that would be conventional loans. The federal government has programs in place to nurture and encourage home ownership. We've all heard of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And these institutions basically were created to ensure and encourage banks to lend to homeowners. This is why, unlike many other countries, Americans can get a 30-year fixed loan on their personal homes. And in fact, these preferential programs are available for properties for up to 4 units. And I recommend you take advantage of these programs if you can at all. This is how we eventually financed that cheek house I told you about in the beginning. There is a challenge with these loans, though, and that is that the properties that need a lot of work, distressed properties, generally don't qualify for this kind of loan. But you can restore them and then convert them into one of these sorts of loans. So remember that. And after you convert it, you'll have a lower interest rate and lower payment because it'll be over 30 years rather than 20 years, and it'll be lovely. You are limited by the number of loans you can do, though. The cap is 5 out of your total portfolio. So try to get these loans early on in life, because they're not available to me anymore unless I were to go buy a personal home. Okay. So let's go over 2 typical loan asks. I want to mention something with loans in Little Rock. Part of the reason I wanted to go over this is because when we got to Little Rock and I was going off to see bankers, I made some really big mistakes in not knowing what to ask for first. I haven't found anybody that really, or any sort of book that explains this. So I thought we would touch on it. The first project we tried to finance was that fourplex in the Governor's Mansion District. I called up Chase Manhattan, and that was a big mistake, but I knew they were a good bank because I'd worked for them and I still had their credit card, and I did everything online and over the phone. It was easy and impersonal, and it really failed. So in retrospect, not knowing anything about how real estate banking worked, it took me a few years how to learn how it worked in Little Rock. And since this is a Women in Preservation series, I'm going to give you the skinny on some of my personal experience and give some advice. I found it extremely hard to be respected in the Little Rock banking community in the beginning. It was much easier once my husband got to town and we would do everything together. The Chase fiasco, I won't hold Little Rock accountable for, but 2 other experiences early on really were very difficult. Very good local banks would give me their lowest loan officer who didn't know anything. And on a 9-plex, the Cathedral Park apartments, we were going to buy it, and that literally 4 days before closing, the young loan officer called me to say that she didn't know that a 9-plex didn't qualify for conventional financing. And the bank owners did step in and do the loan, but they required a very high interest rate and 50% down. So that was really hard. So I think it would have been much better had I known what exactly to ask for and what the umbrella of products were that my bankers could offer. In the early years, I found 2 female bankers that were really wonderful and very helpful and collaborative. And they got us really started. As an aside, though, that they have both died of cancer at very young ages. And I really do think that there's a lot of stress in banking in Little Rock for women. We have 2 fabulous new bank officers, and I don't want to be negative, but know what you need to ask for. So the things to ask for are construction loans and commercial loans. And they are offered by our local banks, and these banks are regulated, but they do not have the same government protections as conventional loans. So the loans process will be easier because there's less paperwork, but the terms will be less favorable and the interest rate will be higher. And the paperwork that they'll need is similar to the paperwork that I just went over. So that's why I wanted you to have a template. What you're wanting to do is give paperwork that consists of the financials provided to the bank to make the loan committee comfortable with the loan and your ability to pay it back. Our current local bankers are excellent business partners. They don't care what color we paint the walls. All they want to make sure is that we can pay the loan back. So here's what to ask for: a commercial loan to buy the property with a construction line of credit to restore it. The bank will want 15 to 25% down and proof that the project is worthwhile in the form of an appraisal that they order. You don't get to give them your own appraisal. And they want to know what the property will be worth at the end of your project. So here's an example of how to ask or what to ask for. Your house price is $100,000. You're going to restore for $100,000. So your appraisal needs to come in at $200,000 as appraised, or rather as constructed. And the bank will ask for 20% down generally on the entire project. The bank funds offered for the purchase of the property is $80,000, and the bank funds offered for construction is the same. So at the end of the day, they'll have a loan to value of 80%. And I want to mention too that because I've said be really conservative in your numbers, ask for as much money as you think you can possibly get. If you don't need it, you don't have to take it and you don't have to pay it back. So here's one that we've gotten in the past, and when there's a money crunch, it's worked out really well because the bank will only require 20% down on the purchase price and assume that your sweat equity and good judgment will be worth an additional $20,000 at the end of the day. So the bank still gives $160,000, but you don't have to put as much skin in the game until at the end of the project. If you're over budget, of course, you'll have to come up with the additional money. Okay, so this is what a bank's going to need to do a loan for you. That as construction, I call it a woo-woo appraisal, because an appraiser just goes out and says, yeah, I think it'll be worth this much if they do what they say they're going to do. And then that profit and loss statement that I talked about earlier, they're going to want something like that. And then this is something to remember. It doesn't seem fair, but banks love outside income outside of the project, and not just any income. They love a W-2. So if you or your partner have a W-2 and don't mind sharing it, your chances of getting a loan go back up dramatically. We do a lot of things without realtors just because not a lot of realtors want to represent projects that cost $15,000 or $18,000. So don't forget to get title insurance and property insurance. If you have a realtor, they will not let you forget that step. Okay. So government programs. And on this, okay, I have a little star next to my notes saying, just to really reiterate to be a pessimist when you're doing the numbers. And you're probably an optimist and an overachiever. And so just don't do what I did. In the early years, I would underestimate how much money we needed for renovations. It made me feel like I was super smart and incredible, but it always left us scrambling for cash and stressed all the time. And unexpected expenses in preservation are the rule rather than the exception. And you want to ask for enough money. So depending on your bank, loan committees often like to offer you less than what you ask for anyway. So because of this, ask for a little more than what you think you'll need. You don't have to use it up. And it's just really important, really important. So I wanted to mention too that Mark and I started restoring our very distressed properties a few years before Arkansas started its tax incentive program. And I can tell you that state tax credits were a game changer. And this is why. Before state tax credits, we could buy a distressed property, fix it up as best we could afford, and sell it, and generally make a $5,000 to $20,000 profit. It worked, but we didn't value our time, so we were making almost nothing per hour. And the federal tax credits, because of this, meant nothing to us because they have a rule that you have to hold a property for 5 years. And we just couldn't afford not to sell our projects. We were lucky not to lose money, and we were always able to take out our original down payment at the time of sale for the next project. So, our goal was to play a small part in revitalizing the neighborhood, and a rising tide floats all boats. And the thought was that at the end of the day, at least the 4 apartment buildings that we had and our personal home would appreciate, and that would be a good retirement plan. But there was never enough money. So when we heard about the Arkansas tax credit program and we looked at it very skeptically, neither one of us could imagine that it would be worth the time and effort to do paperwork required to qualify for tax credits. And Mark had the brilliant idea of talking to one of our younger friends, whose name is Lucretia Diaz, who had recently done paperwork on a house renovation that she personally did at the Riker House, into doing our tax credits for a fee. Lucretia really didn't want to do it, but she agreed. And I think it was mostly because she knew we needed her help. And she's a very sweet person, and we've kept that relationship ever since. Without state tax credits, there would be no way we could have continued our efforts to save the historic housing stock in the Governor's Mansion District or the MacArthur Park Historic District. Here's how the tax credits generally work and how we use them. I will keep this brief because I think there have been very other qualified people discussing this. So I think I have, let's see. Okay. So here's how they work. Your investment must be at least $25,000. And this is all for commercial properties, not for your personal home. The project must be completed before you get them, and you must show receipts. Not all of your expenses qualify for tax credit reimbursement. They are transferable, so you can cash them out, which is what Mark and I have ended up doing. State tax credits are non-severable, so you have to use them all in 1 year. So if you get a $25,000 tax credit and you only have a $15,000 tax burden, you have to lose $10,000 of that tax credit. So our accountant recommended many years ago that we just cash them out because we never have such a huge tax credit in 1 year. And the tax credit must be used within 5 years, and there is no holding requirement. So the property can be sold, and that's nice. And the paperwork mimics the federal tax credit application. So, and this is how the federal tax credits work. they're a little bit different in that you have to put down a lot more, put a lot more effort into the building. You must spend at least 100% of the purchase price less the land value. And your project, again, must be complete before you get the tax credits. It's different than the state, but not all of the rehabilitation expenses count toward tax credits. But there's a couple of things that are good and bad with federal tax credits. They can't be cashed out, but they are severable. So you can use one tax credit over multiple years, and they last for over 20 years. But again, if you're going to use federal tax credits, you really have to hold on to the property because you have to give the tax credits back if you sell it. Both the state and federal tax credit programs are facilitated by the Arkansas Department of Heritage. I have always found this agency extremely helpful. It also has a great website that is very informative. I'm honored to say that their website features one of our more challenging restorations at 1410 Gaines Street. Before tax credits, we had to sell our investments and hope to get enough money out of their sale to start the next project. It was very slow and risky, and proper preservation is expensive, and it's much more lucrative and headache-free to build new construction. Until this summer, the state tax credit was 25%, and now in Little Rock, it's 30%. So what tax credit means is that we can invest in high-risk properties in our riskier part of the neighborhood that doesn't have much resale value, and restore the worst properties to do our best to rent them out and be good neighbors and wait for the neighborhood housing values to catch up. It took about 10 years for this to happen in the Governor's Mansion District. When we moved in full time, housing prices were depressed. SOMA didn't exist yet, and the houses stayed on the market for months, if not years. We decided to take advantage of the federal tax credits and hold on to some single family homes and duplexes. The state cash tax credit cashed out gave us the 20% to pay the banks their down payments and continue restoring properties so we could continue the process forward. We would have definitely run out of down payments early on without the tax credits. I'm really happy to say now that we have sold all of our single family homes and duplexes and all but one went to owner occupied buyers, and owner occupied buyers is just wonderful for neighborhood development. So now let's see, the Little Rock Historic Commission and Capital Zoning. A little backdrop is that when I lived in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, I lived in a quaint little neighborhood called Victoria Park, which was a mile from the ocean and right next to the downtown commercial district. It was a gorgeous location and I could afford it. There were huge banyan trees and mango trees, and that just enveloped all of these 1,200 square feet post-war and post-air conditioning bungalows. All of them were one story, made of stuccoed cinder block, and really charming. And as I mentioned, they were affordable and had absolutely no historic protections. In the 15 years I lived there, I saw house after house bought and torn down by developers. By the time I left, McMansions became the norm rather than the exception, and wealthy owners came in and displaced the artist and less affluent homeowners. Tensions developed as newcomers and the old guard clashed. And this is all to say that when we came to the Governor's Mansion District, the idea of property protections really resonated with me. I could talk all day about the pros and cons of regulation, but I'll instead share a few of my personal experiences in Little Rock. Again, I want to preface this with the fact that we have had very few issues with either of these regulatory groups, and we've had to go in front of them often. Mark and I have tried to honor the historic integrity of the structures we rehabilitate, and our dependency on tax credit revenues has reinforced our desire to keep the Arkansas Department of Heritage and National Park Service very happy with our work. However, we did have challenges. So here are some points I wish we would have known. And I don't think I have a slide on this, so I'm just going to read it off. The capital zoning map overlaps much of the Governor's Mansion District and some of MacArthur Park Historic District, but includes more area than that. Therefore, you may be subject to oversight, even if your project doesn't qualify for tax credits. So check your capital zoning map first. The Little Rock Historic Commission oversees the MacArthur Park Historic District, but capital zoning also oversees parts of MacArthur Park Historic District. So these two commissions, which do not necessarily work together, and they have different, somewhat arbitrary rules on what can be staff approved, it's just tough because it's important to know what the guidelines are if you're in those areas of both of those bodies, because you have to go in front of both of those bodies. When we've had to do that, if it has to do with fence height or something like that, we always go with the most strict rule, and then both groups will be okay with it. One thing to recognize is that if you require a change or addition to a structure that does not qualify for staff approval for your project, you could be delayed by 3 or 4 months as you go through the process. So start the process very early. And then this is a challenging note because I'm a neighbor. If you're from outside of the neighborhood doing something, you're not going to notice this that much. But both the Little Rock Historic Commission and the Capital Zoning Commission structures harbor an environment that tends to pit neighbor against neighbor. It's hard to get neighbors to volunteer for all positions in our small little neighborhoods. So you may be assessed by both individuals that don't know much about historic structures, but more importantly, sometimes there are architects and contractors that think that they know everything about historic preservation, that think the guidelines are actually rules with no room for reason, and act really with the religious zealot's determination to overmanage your project. Sometimes arguing with each other, which can cost a lot of money and mental angst by the folks going in front of them. This really hasn't happened to Mark and me much, but we are at those meetings all the time, and we do see it happen. Something that has impacted us a little bit, and I'll bring it up a little later, is the commissions do, without trying to harbor an environment of NIMBYism or not in my backyard. We humans really do hate change, and guidelines that were originally put in place to ensure these beautiful historic homes were saved have inadvertently created opportunities for a few individuals to squash change and hinder economic prosperity. I won't go into that anymore, but I do have a slide on my advice. Because of this sort of thing, find out where your project falls geographically and who's in charge of the regulation. Know the guidelines well. There's booklets on this, and both groups will happily make them accessible, and I believe they're both online. And I wish I would have done, I do this now, and I wish I would have done it from the beginning. If your request is in your own personal neighborhood, ask someone else to present for you. It's very hard to have neighbors attack you in a public setting, and it just can't help but happen. So if they attack someone who isn't terribly emotional about the project, everyone will be a lot happier. And then change of use requests can really upset neighbors, so plan accordingly. One thing I've noticed is that Airbnb seems to be a very hot topic in this neighborhood right now. The other thing is know the entity's purview and don't be intimidated by individuals requiring more than they are allowed to require or insisting guidelines that are strict rules and have no wiggle room. And remember, just be calm, because if your state and tax credit applications are approved, your commission will approve what you're going to do too. They respect the state and federal historic district people. And just, if you're ever serve on a commission, thank you, because we desperately need people to serve on our commissions. But please remember to be really nice and respectful to the applicants, because they're probably terrified. Here's a few pictures of projects that the kind of reflect the NIMBYism and this weirdness. When our very first big project was at 1919 Gaines Street, and it was a tiny little 1,200 square foot Victorian turned into a triplex that had cockroaches everywhere and pit bulls in the front yard. And we bought it from a guy who was making a great profit when we bought it for something like $25,000, and he bought it for much less the week before out of auction. And we didn't know anything about preservation. We'd just come up from Florida, and it was a cute little home, and we wanted to save it. And we found windows for sale at National, because the housing crisis had left so many materials abandoned. And all of these windows were gorgeous. They were wood. They could be stained on the inside. They looked great on the outside. We installed the windows in this little bungalow, and they had a fatal flaw that we didn't even know about. And that was that they were 4/4, totally inappropriate for the house. We learned, we understood, we replaced the windows. There were no arguments. We ended up donating our bargain to Habitat for Humanity and rehabbing the old windows. But certain neighbors didn't appreciate what we had done. So when we went to the Historic District Commission to ask for permission, this is a big house that we ended up taking the asbestos siding off of. And legally, we had to do it ourselves. So Mark mostly, and me a little bit, took all of this asbestos siding, and I don't know if you can see it, but it's on the bottom side of that slide. It was all over the house. And one of our neighbors in the Governor's Mansion District wrote a letter to the commission saying they liked the idea that we wanted to take off the asbestos, but they didn't think that we were the right people to do it. And how more hurtful can you get? And that's what these local commissions can do. So just be strong and go through it anyway. More evidence of some asbestos siding that we took off, and we found a beautiful house underneath it. It was really, really quite wonderful. And the house has been sold since and has new owners that have decided they don't like the color blueberry. This is another one that we didn't understand the rules right. Totally our fault. But again, 2 blocks from our house, we bought it out of foreclosure, wanted to make it beautiful, figured we'd put our very quiet office in it, and ask for permission to do an occasional wedding, and we could get a construction loan because bankers need to show income. And the Mansion Advisory Group just hated the idea. So during the meeting, there was a tornado siren, so we had to go home, and we withdrew our application and just hustled to find money to fix the house up. And it took twice as long, and we didn't do half the job we normally do, but we did find an owner, and it was a beautiful house, and I think we really helped it. Understand your guidelines. It turns out that people, it couldn't be, the Cornish house couldn't be staff approved because it wasn't our home. And we very, again, naively and perhaps quite wrongly figured that since we loved the neighborhood so much and only lived 2 blocks away. It was like we owned it, but that's not owning. That's not being an owner occupied. So shame on us. So interior design. South Florida really impacted how I look at interior design in an odd sort of way. When I moved to the town, it had a population of 100,000. By the time I left, it had a population of 2 million with skyscrapers everywhere. New construction was super competitive and everywhere. And we went off to open houses for everything. We saw what the bathrooms looked like, the kitchens, and it was really high end. Energy efficiency was tantamount in that Florida warm climate. And as I said, competition was fierce. South Florida construction gave Mark and I the confidence to make our kitchens and baths beautiful with the modern conveniences of washer dryers and efficient heat and air. And we knew we would find renters. We did our best with the historic windows, and I'm not going to talk about it, but I love what the National Park Service does, but I wish they would allow windows to be replaced with mimics so that heating and cooling bills could be much less in these big, beautiful homes. We have always tried to design our restorations to keep any historic features intact while adding modern features that homeowners now expect. I have seen restorations that put bathrooms and kitchens under stairwells and in back closets and bedrooms and windowless attics that are with 8-foot ceilings. And we do things differently. I'm sure some would criticize what we do, but we restore everything we do as if we're going to live in them ourselves. And as an aside, I want it real clear that we've never converted a single family home into a multifamily residence. But if we buy a multifamily residence, we do our best to make it as nice inside as possible. When we're looking at interior design and what to save and what to not, we try to use some common sense. If we can save historic features, we do. If they're too foregone or obsolete and not charming, like gas wall heaters in a small bathroom that are a life safety issue, we take those out. If it's beautiful tile, we try to save it. We try to think about the future user and can they use that kitchen that's in a 6x6 under the staircase, or do they need a bigger kitchen? And then we've used the Department of Heritage often when talking about how do we get modern heat and air in and washer dryers. We get their advice on things because they've been around a bit. And I think it's really important too to remember that one of the things that tax credits affords us all is to do a construction project right. So we try to remember this and put the money into the property on the front end rather than doing it by bits and bobs and 5 years from now having to do a new remodel because we really didn't do it right in the first place. So that's how we use tax credits, to try to do a restoration the right way, changing out all the systems right, and preparing the house. So I promised more pictures of before and after. Here's this is at 605 Daisy Bates, and I don't know if you can see, but there's two built-in cabinets and a nice window seat, and this is what it looked like afterwards. These were historic features that made a lot of sense to save, even though we had to fix the glass, etc. Here is a bathroom that we bought this house already brought down to stud. but we saved this bathroom because the tile was just so perfect. Here are samples of our very tiny kitchens. Here's a before picture of 514 East 8th Street. We've just finished this project, and you can see we switched the bathroom and the kitchen because we didn't want to have to do anything with this fireplace, and a 6 by 6 inch kitchen is just not big enough for anyone. A 6 by 6 bathroom people can live with. But that's the sort of thing that we'll do, things that make a little more sense. And here is one of our restorations that I'm proudest of. It's 909 Cumberland. It's now painted purple. But when we bought this house, all of the molding was in excellent, well, I can't say excellent shape, but all of the molding was there. All of the woodwork, the floors, etc., were in great shape. And we took down all the molding, labeled it, saved it, and put it all back. This property sold before we were completed. It was completed, and we let Lucretia do the tax credits for the new owner. So this is all the new owner's stuff, but it really turned out beautifully, and I'm really proud of that project. Here's 920 Scott Street. Bought it out of foreclosure probably 10 or 11 years ago and totally redid it. Very pretty house. We've now sold it to a fellow that lives 2 blocks away and takes great care of it. Here's 621 Daisy Bates, built as a duplex. We kept it as a duplex and have since sold it to owners. So it's owner occupied. And here's some samples of our kitchens and baths. Let's see. These homes have sold relatively rapidly. It's funny, the nicer remodel we do, always the house sells much better. If we try to cut corners and save things from the 70s that really aren't historic, they just won't sell. So on here's an example of a beautiful owner occupied before and after. This is a duplex that's now owner occupied. But on a last note, I would like to say that my life experience are still impacting my evolution in being wise about preservation, and I'm sure I'll continue to learn. I am actually beginning to enjoy and appreciate the mid-century modern movement, which is my parents' generation construction, and people generally don't like their parents' generation. Also, in the last 6 or 7 years, Mark and I have been spending much of our vacation time going to a small village in southwest France called Sarlat. We have a home in a town that's over 600 years old, and it's highly regulated by France's National Historic Program. In France, and especially in my little town that receives 1 million people in August, there is a very different attitude toward these historic windows and their preservation. In a country that believes in climate change and is trying to minimize the amount of energy used through the country, to that end, the original windows are allowed to be replaced with windows that mimic the original. Though I must admit that my 600-year-old home probably didn't have windows 600 years ago. So maybe that's part of the easiness of it. But the windows that are in Sarlat are double paned and energy efficient. They are crazy well built and expensive, but they're no more expensive than having a master carpenter rebuild a window that has basically doesn't work anymore, and then promptly cover it with an inefficient and impractical and ugly storm window. So high energy bills are something that we must be very concerned about in historic preservation, I think. if we want people to be able to afford these big homes, they must be able to afford the heating and cooling associated with the structures. However, I don't make the rules, and I may be gone when the rules do change, if they ever do. And until then, I'm happy to play ball the way the rules require. So here's my little town in France. You can see it's just beautiful. So in closing, I would like to thank Rachel and Preserve Arkansas and anyone still listening to this presentation for allowing me to reflect on my past and hopefully share some useful information. Helping to rebuild our neighborhood one structure at a time has most likely been the most fulfilling thing I have done in my life. I would have never thought 30 years ago that this would be my career. I truly believe that if you can do a little math, you have the time and determination and a little savings, you too can do something really worthwhile. That said, my opinions and advice are free and worth every penny, as they say. So if there's any questions, I'd love to answer them. And thank you.
Thank you, Jill. Excellent job.
Why, thank you.
Oh my gosh, you look at the list, just goes on and on.
I know. And what's fun is they're all within 5 blocks of my house.
Yeah.
So
that's awesome. Thank
anyway.
you. You've got a couple questions. Hang on. Okay. First one, what do you mean when you say cashing out a tax credit?
Okay, so the official term is that Arkansas state tax credits are transferable and they are not severable. So if you get $100,000 tax credit and your tax burden is $20,000 a year, you'd have to use it all in that 1 year. So people like the Waltons or the Stevens or Tyson, they need that $100,000 tax credit. So they will buy it off of you at a discounted rate. So we've negotiated, because we do a lot of tax credits, 90 cents on the dollar. And for one-off projects, you can find banks that will buy them for 85 cents on the dollar. So that means that if you have $100,000 tax credit, you can cash it out for $85,000 cash in the bank. That $15,000 difference will go to, some of it will go to the bank that's buying it from you, but they have something like a private banking division that's allowing, let's call it the Waltons, to save. They might give the Waltons 5% deduction in their state tax credit, and the bank may keep the rest. But it's basically letting someone who really needs the tax credit use it on their taxes, and they give you money for that. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Yes, I hope it does. If it doesn't, then they can type another question. Okay, let's see. You've got lots of kind words, people thanking you, which I'll send you all of these. Okay. How difficult has it been to find qualified craftsmen? I know you've got a good crew, but did it take you a while to find people that y'all use?
So I have a good crew. Todd Rainey was doing this before we were doing it, and then he retired. And Todd introduced us to his crew. At the time, his crew spoke Spanish only, and I spoke Spanish, so that was very convenient. They were here on a short-term visa. I worked, well, it's just the way of the world. The members of our crew have married Americans, and so they are legal and residents, and speaking English a lot better than I speak Spanish now. But we were very lucky with that. It's as for people, we also have an incredible person that has agreed to work with us. His name is Dave Miller. And we will try to get him a preservation award next year because he's did all the tuck pointing on the original Little Rock High School, and it took him 2.5 years to do. He is now doing the Kramer School. He's extremely well paid, but he's incredible and will save those buildings. And he's a dying breed. We could get into immigration policy, but right now, very few parents are thinking they want their children to restore windows for they almost all of the craftsmen that I've met are non-American. It's very hard to find them.
It is. Yep. We're slowly working to try to change that, to encourage some more young people
Preserve Arkansas.
to get interested in that and realize how much money they can make doing that. Partly because of that right now, but it needs to happen. It's a skill that they can use all over the world.
Oh yeah.
If they wanted to.
And we pay our crew very well because they have options.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I have one question for you from me.
Sure.
What's next? What's the next big thing?
Well, the next big thing is I have a couple, three extremely competent young people, young being in their 30s and 40s, that have been with me for a while. And they would like to carry on the torch with focusing on rebuilding commercial and if there are commercial structures, but also in working to turn our mission into more neighborhood development oriented endeavors, such as trying to improve the school system, creating an environment where people can afford their own homes in our neighborhood. I don't know what that looks like, but it's exciting. But eventually, Mark and I both want to retire.
Yes, I know you do.
Yes.
Well, that's very exciting. I'm glad to hear it.
It's very, very exciting. I'll have to introduce them. I think that they're all members of Preserve Arkansas at this point.
Oh, good. I hope so.
Haley is one of them. Oh, no, you didn't. No, they're members of QQA. We'll have to get them as members.
You'll have to get them as members of PA too.
Yes.
Okay, Jill. Well, thank you so much for your presentation. We appreciate you very much. I enjoyed it. I think everyone else did too. You still got people watching you.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
I know, they're dedicated.
Okay.
This is our last Women in Preservation talk for the year, and we will start back up on February 13th, 2024 with a whole new series of outstanding women. Our first speaker will be preservation consultant Amber Jones of Little Rock. So many of you know Amber. So be sure to tune in on February 13th, and we'll announce the full 2024 schedule before the end of this year. Thanks, everybody.
Very exciting. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jill. Bye.